بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيد الأولين والآخرين سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, I am honored and very happy to be with you at this year's Mass California Convention. It's a blessing and an honor always to be with you. I want to congratulate our sister Sundus on the birth of a baby, mashallah. May Allah make that baby from the righteous, inshallah. And we ask Allah to bless all of you and increase you, inshallah. I do not plan to discuss this subject very long. I am not a historiographer. My specialty is not history. And I know that Imam Siraj lived things that I may talk about, right? I can only talk about them. So out of respect for the subject and my own limitations, and then of course the magnanimity of Imam Siraj, I'm going to keep my comments rather short. I would like to make a few points, and the first is the importance of history in the Islamic canon. When we look at the Quran, we find that a third of the Quran are stories. And those stories have many purposes, and they are largely, of course, historic. But Imam al-Junaid says, Hikayatul Salihin jun min junudi la yuthabitullah biha quluba awliyai. That the stories of the righteous are like infantry sent to the hearts of the friends of God to strengthen their heart. So when we find that Sayyidina Adam struggles with his family, that Sayyidina Nuh is being bullied, that Sayyidina Yusuf is isolated, that Sayyidina Maryam is being mistreated because of her gender, the Sayyidina Ibrahim is being kicked out for speaking the truth, the Sayyidina Musa has to stand up for justice. We are, finding like contextual relations with the prophets, and we're finding like strength, right? We're finding resolve. Then when we look at our ancestors, we see that there was a tremendous focus on history, because if you don't collect your history, someone else does. It becomes his story, right? So we see that the maghazi of the Prophet, right? The battles of the Prophet are collected. The seerah begins to take shape in the first century, right? After the Prophet's passing, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then we find after some time, for example, Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi in his Tarikh of Madinati Dar es-Salam, which is known as Tarikh al-Baghdadi, right? He writes this massive text on the history of Baghdad itself. We find Ibn Asakir, he writes, the history of Damascus. We find the history of Andalus. It's like multiple volumes. It's huge. We find Imam al-Dhahabi actually doing it twice, right? He wrote Tarikh al-Islam, right, which is kind of an abbreviated version, and then he wrote a massive Tarikh al-Islam, and then he wrote Sirah Alam al-Nubala, which is just focusing on like scholars. So 3 or 4 books. We know that Sayyidina Imam al-Bukhari, he wrote a book on history, Tarikh. So there's this Ibn Khaldun, radiyallahu anhu, who focuses on sociology and the marriage of theology and sociology and the physical sciences and so many things in his muqaddimah. The point is like our scholars and our community were focused on history. That takes us now to America, and the history of Islam in America is one which is incredibly deep and beyond my level of training. So I'm going to share with you just a few points about the history of Islam in America. Number one is that the history of Islam in America is one of many different people from many different backgrounds. And it starts in many ways with people who are, of course, enslaved in the Western Hemisphere. And I encourage you to read like Dr. Margarita Rosa out of Princeton University, who translated The Du'as of the Oppressed for Yaqeen Institute. A Prince Among Slaves is a great book to read. Perhaps the most important book on the Bahia revolt that I believe happens in 1835 in Brazil, of course, is Dr. Michael Gomez at NYU, where I'm working and teaching. He has a book called The Black Crescent. He spoke in some of my classes, and he in a very scholarly, his citations are a book, traces, the advent of Senegambian Muslims being brought by the Portuguese to the Western Hemisphere in places like Haiti and the DR, and then eventually in Brazil, and he just gets into some incredible information that's not romanticized, and it's going to be a second point I make. We don't need to romanticize this, but when we think about where we are today, we are the products of insurrections in Brazil. We are the products of Syrians who came to America in the early 20th century. We are the products of people from the Levant who came to the Midwest. My father-in-law is an Aussie. I was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I ran into a whole family of Aussies who they got on the phone, and this uncle and that uncle and this cousin and that cousin and this person knew this person. I'm white. I have 4 cousins, man. So it's like, this is really beyond me, mashallah. But I think it's very important that we don't tie the narrative of Islam in America to one ethnic group, but to the experiences of numerous people. Joseph Mitchell, who wrote for The New Yorker, lived in New York in the 1960s. In his memoirs, he talks about a mosque. Some say the first mosque, although this is debatable, because Masjid Dawood, to my knowledge, and Imam Siraj can correct me, I think is considered the first mosque, but a mosque that was established in 1938. And he writes, I'm actually looking at his memoirs now, he's describing this mosque that was on Powell Street. And this mosque is still there, by the way, but it's not open all the time. And he says that, the Muslims are Russians who came here from several parts of Russia and from Poland and Lithuania. Some are Tartars. Among themselves, they speak Russian. They use Arabic in their services. People in the neighborhood call them the Turks. He's writing about this group of Muslims who contributed to where we are. In Toledo, Ohio, you'll find a large number of brothers and sisters from Lebanon who've started communities. In El Paso, Texas, you will find our brothers and sisters who are largely converts from Latino community, founding communities. You'll find, of course, a massive number of African-American brothers and sisters, Black Americans, who have founded and built incredible communities. And what I think is interesting about Joseph Mitchell's article is that, right down in State Street where I live, now in Brooklyn, near State Street with Imam Abdullah, who's a mass member, you find Imam Dawood Ahmed establishing a community. In Boston, Masjid Hamdulillah is also established by, I believe, Imam Dawood. And this just happens across the country. Different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different cultures, different languages. And that is what makes Islam incredibly powerful. The alamiyya of Islam, not al-ulama. We don't believe in globalization, we believe in al-alamiyya. So I think it's very important that when we think of our religious history, our religious ancestry in this country, we are able to appreciate that. And my experience with this, even in the academy, is the more that you research this, the more that you're shocked. My daughter was born in Manhattan, and there at the hospital, I began to read, and I found out that just a few blocks away, the Syrians used to be there. And there was actually, I read it in a memoir at my university, that the adhan used to be made there. Now that place is gone, right? It's probably like, some kind of finance house or something, but there was a time. I read about Alexander Russell Webb, of course, who many of us, Dr. Omar Farouk Abdullah, wrote an incredible book about his life, very, very incredible text, who he and his buddy used to make adhan in Union Square in New York City, right? This is just in New York, right? When I went to Al-Azhar in Egypt, and I was doing my entrance exams, I was told of a few Americans who came before me and preceded me, like Sheikh Tawfiq Hassan, or Hassan Tawfiq, excuse me, from Harlem, from the Masjid of Islamic Brotherhood, who was till this day is very respected and known as someone who translated the works of Imam al-Banna and others, and of course Imam Tariq Abdul Rashid is still there and leading us in New York City. I mean, this is a community that comes through multiple iterations. And then again, back to State Street Masjid, Imam Siraj can talk about, and I'm just talking about New York, right? In general, where, the Dar begins to formulate out of Masjid Dawood and then grows and moves to Nordstrom Ave and other places, and then eventually comes to Atlanta, Georgia. And I become Muslim through a person who came out of the Dar Islam movement, Sheikh Abdurrahman Basir. So the point that I'm trying to make is that we have to appreciate that our history in America is one which touches on the Pakistani community, the Palestinian community, Black Americans, Latino Americans, white Americans, right? Brothers and sisters from Africa now, like in Harlem and in the Bronx, Bengali brothers and sisters, Malaysian brothers and sisters across the country. If you actually, and I really hope that I can do this with my school one day, is a walking tour of Islam in America, because it is invigorating, it's beautiful, and it also lets you appreciate how different cultures, different languages, different people struggled to maintain their faith and to maintain their deen. So that's the first point. I think the second point that is extremely important, and I learned this from a dear friend of mine, Dr. Zahir Ali, who I believe is the premier historian in the Muslim community in North America. At the Brooklyn Historical Society, I sit on a board with him there. And every time I get the chance to send or spend time with Dr. Zahir, I learn something. I learn a lot. And he told me something that I want to share with you. And he said that, and he's a scholar of religions, but specifically Islam in New York. And he shared with me that historically in America, religious communities have succeeded that have not completely rejected or completely assimilated into American life. That religious communities that have historically succeeded and lasted and stuck are those who critically engaged America and critically negotiated their relationship in America and favored their religious principles. So in defense of religious principles and ideas, they negotiate. They don't capitulate completely, right? Nor do they completely reject, but they negotiate. And of course, this is prophetic. The Prophet says, "Khayru umuri awsatuha," right? The best affairs of people are those that are in the balance. And then, of course, Allah says, "Wa'mur bil urfi," right? You should call to people to what is socially acceptable according to Quran and Sunnah. Finally, I think it's important that in this subject, we don't romanticize this, right? We tend to think about history in a way that gives us a sense of value, and that's why we like to hear the good side, but there is a good and a bad to the history of Muslims in America. And there should be discussions not only on what was done right, but what was done wrong, so that we can protect ourselves. For example, I think one of the things which is wrong right now is our failure to get out of the way for younger generations of Muslim leaders. I worry when I see that the leadership of many of the national organizations are well over 50 years old. There's very few women involved. And there is no passing of the baton. I believe that history will not be kind to that leadership. If it does not, and this is one of the beauties of the mass Usra system, right? That it begins to train and bring in young people who can eventually lead one day. And I like to tell imams, how many students do you have that are under 25 years old? Right? How many students do you have that are under 40 years old? How many old folks do you have? Like, are you scaling your knowledge and not just creating a fan club, but really investing in people? I think IOK, right, in LA is doing under Sheikh Na'man is doing a fabulous job of educating people, right, and creating new leadership. So I think that history won't be kind unless we hear, especially within the Sunni Muslim community, which I can speak to, begin to think about passing the baton as a sign of strategic success. And having young leaders and not having people that are so devoted that they can accept the idea a great leader and a great organization, a great institution, is able to continue with the message, not the messenger. Right? وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. So as an example. So I think it's also important that we don't simply romanticize, because it also creates a difficulty for people who are now serving the community. The expectation is that they're going to be perfect, they'll never make mistakes, they won't have shortcomings, where we are all very human, and we all need each other at times when we need to heal and get better. The last is I would like to give you some resources, because again, I think we want to appreciate, especially like peer-reviewed information on this topic. There is a set of books, it's like super expensive, by Patrick D. Bowen, 2 volumes. One is A History of Conversion to Islam in the United States, Volume 1, which deals just with white American Muslims before 1975, which is incredible. He has another one, Part 2, which deals with black American Muslims who converted. Zakiya, who is a local in the DMV area, a brilliant woman, and her husband, mashallah, wonderful people, has a book called No One Taught Me the Human Side of Islam. And this is just like the Muslim hippie story of living with bipolar disorder, right? It's not romantic, but then also negotiating and growing as a Muslim. Sheikh Dr. Abdul Hakim Quick has a number of books and lectures through the Maghrib Institute, as well as the books he's written that talk about forgotten roots. And he has a few books that talk about Levantine Muslims who lived in Michigan and lived in Iowa and Idaho and in these parts of America, and how some of them are completely gone, right? Some of them have been lost to assimilation. It's not a romanticized story. I'm sure that Imam Siraj, within his own historical trajectory, will be able to share with you the good and the bad, right? The challenges and successes that any community makes. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us and bless you. I ask Allah to increase us and increase you. I hope that our engagement with history can be critical. And I will leave you with this. I think it's very important that we begin to document our history in the American Muslim community. I think the community of Imam W.D. Muhammad has done a great job of documenting his history. I hope that someone will fund someone to sit with Imam Siraj, Hafidhullah, and just start from A to Z, man. Dr. Jamal Badawi, we lost Dr. Sakhar 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, Allah yarhamu, there in the LA area, who Teacher of the Year in the United States of America in the 70s, right? I mean, he has an incredible history to share with people. And that would also include going into communities and finding the elders, like Dr. Siddiqui, for example, and sitting with them and getting stories from them. Dr. Ingrid Madison is someone that has a lot to share with people, and so many others. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us learn from history so that we can live for the future. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and increase you and allow us to, inshallah, grow. And I just want to remind you of the points that I made. Number one, it's very important to get beyond maybe some of the shallow, romanticized rhetoric about how things were and read. I encourage you. I gave some references. Dr. Michael Gomez's book, The Black Crescent. Dr. Umar Farq Abdullah's book on Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb. I'm not related to him. Everybody asked me. I gave also the book of Patrick D. Bowen. 2 volumes. It's super expensive, but man, it's magnificent. You have again the books of Zakiya, who, again, just another gem of a community. I mentioned you can find online like the articles on the first mosque in New York and some of the memoirs of Joseph Mitchell. And then, of course, in the New York area, for some time, we actually had a non-Muslim, Dr. Catherine Merriman, who I believe was doing her PhD at Duke, and I've met her in North Carolina. Astaghfirullah, sorry, that gave me shot. But she is a wealth of information on Islam in New York. I mean, incredible. Her and Dr. Zahir Ali are some of the best. And also go and visit the older masjids in the area and touch base with your history. May Allah bless you and increase you. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakum Allahu khairan. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.